Hello and welcome to Heart Containers, a daily Nintendo podcast where every Monday through Friday we discuss the latest Nintendo news. I'm your host, Rami Fawaz, and this is the episode for Friday, March 22nd. I want to start off by apologizing for missing a couple days here. We're trying to get the scheduling quirks figured out. It's a little difficult to do a daily podcast, but that's okay. We are going to figure it out, and we're back. We're live. We have so much to talk about. I mean, talk about a bad week to miss a couple of days. We had Google's big Stadia announcement. Yes, Google now has a video game platform. We had the Nindies Showcase, which happened on Wednesday, where they announced all types of things, including Cuphead, what was seemed to be an Xbox console exclusive, is now going to be on the Nintendo Switch. We got some important sales data from the month before, as well as overall for indies, and more Microsoft partnership news. So we're going to talk about all of that and more in today's daily Nintendo report.
Well, the wait is over. This is Nintendo DS. My body is ready.
We would like to play.
A way to make 3D games a reality, and it's called the Wii U Game Pen.
On Tuesday, Google revealed their plans for the future of the company's involvement in the games industry. Now, if you remember earlier this year in January, Google launched the beta for Project Stream, is what they were calling it at the time. Project Stream was this test where you could play Assassin's Creed Odyssey as it streamed through your Google Chrome browser, which allowed you to use almost any old computer or laptop to stream a AAA game without a console, and you could still play it as normally, depending on your internet connection. Most people who tried it said that it worked relatively well, and that was kind of like the nascent beginnings of Google dipping their toes into the gaming atmosphere. Tuesday was the declaration of like, hey, this is what we're doing. This is what it is officially. This is what Project Stream was all about, and that's called Stadia. Stadia is going to be a new gaming platform, and it's going to be capable of AAA video game experiences, just like Assassin's Creed Odyssey, across a multitude of devices. They're talking phones, they're talking tablets, laptops, desktops, traditional TVs, if you use Chromecast, all of it. In the demo for Stadia, they showcased the guy playing Odyssey again, and he quickly just zipped from one device to the other, to the other, to the other in the span of like 2 minutes, and every single time he went to a different device, the game would start up in like seconds and pick up from the exact same portion that he left off on the last device. It was actually really cool to see. The platform will end up supporting 4K HDR streaming at 60 FPS, so it's pretty comparable from what you would expect from an Xbox One and a PS4, but it actually has the capability of expanding those specs in the future. So it's not only modern game console proof, but it's next gen proof, because they even talked about 8K streaming, as well as the ability to upgrade whatever you need depending on the game you're trying to run on Stadia. So it is basically built for the future. This is the declaration of the first next-gen console, I believe. And it'll also support things like split-screen multiplayer without sharing hardware resources, server-side art shaders, and instant access to Google Assistant for in-game help. The one that I think I like the most about that one is most about all of these features is the split screen multiplayer. So as you may have noticed, as technology has grown in the gaming industry, and as games want to take more and more of that technology to produce prettier, bigger games, it's actually been a lot harder to supply split screen experiences on consoles, because they want to max out the consoles and the single player experience. And when you have split screen, you're basically running the game twice, and that means it takes twice the capability to run that game. So over time, as the technology has been pushed forward on consoles, we've seen less and less split screen multiplayer. And what they announced with Google Stadia is that since you're basically using one instance of their server hardware, whatever it's going to be, to run Stadia, if you do decide to play split screen with someone right next to you, even though you're streaming it, they'll actually use two separate instances. So although it seems like you're playing one gaming platform, they're actually using two in order to supply the extra push, the extra oomph that game would need to actually handle split screen. So this is actually very impressive and could have a lot of implications on the future of multiplayer in general. They also talked about integration with YouTube, which is probably the most significant part of all of this when it comes to Google specifically, because Google is really the only company that's going to be able to do this. So you're going to be able to easily jump between watching a game on YouTube and playing it. You can watch your favorite YouTube streamers, which I know there aren't nearly as many as there are on Twitch, but then you can join them live just by entering a lobby from YouTube, or you can watch a trailer on YouTube for the next big AAA game, press a single button, and 10 seconds later, you're in that game. So that is really the big draw, I think, for integration with YouTube and Stadia. Now, Stadia will be arriving later this year, although they did not announce really any details or release date, any pricing plans. They were very shy from the exact information that we would need to know how you go from not having Stadia to being a Stadia user, and also what games specifically you're going to play, although it's safe to assume that you're probably going to be able to play all of the big AAA third-party published games like Assassin's Creed Odyssey. I know they showed off a couple more. They talked about Doom Eternal. They also showed off Tomb Raider. So it's safe to say that you're along those lines. So here's the big question here. Why am I talking about this, right? This is Google. This has nothing to do with Nintendo or Nintendo Switch, or does it? I actually think that Google Stadia will have a decent impact, or at least will have the potential to decently impact Nintendo's plans in the near and far future, as well as maybe the Nintendo Switch, how well the Nintendo Switch will perform over the next few years. And that's an opinion that potentially is in the minority, because when I went and read and looked at the comments, the conversations that were happening after Stadia, a lot of people kind of laughed at the idea that Nintendo could be at all in trouble by this, that Nintendo is basically isolated enough from Google, from Xbox, from PlayStation that they don't have to worry about it. And I actually disagree. I think that's possible that Nintendo doesn't have to worry about it. But what they're doing right now with the Nintendo Switch, why it's working so well, is because the Nintendo Switch is so unique when compared to its competitors that its value proposition is very easily understood when it comes to third parties and indies. Every Nintendo platform has first-party titles from Nintendo that sell a lot of copies, but you can't necessarily run an entire business on first parties. Just look at the Wii U. The Wii U had a ton of first-party content. In fact, we keep on porting first-party content from the Wii U onto the Switch. That's how much good stuff was isolated on that console, but that wasn't really important enough, or that wasn't significant enough to take the Wii U and turn it into a major success. The Wii U didn't have indies. The Wii U didn't have significant amount of indies, and it also didn't have third-party support. Not after the first year it didn't, and that was really a big problem for the Wii U, and no one invested in it. The Switch, on the other hand, has this value proposition of being a console that you can take with you anywhere and play with anyone, and that has really inspired a lot of people to play their games in different ways. Because you can take it anywhere, it's a new feature for games that you never would have really thought about in the first place. Indies are doing so well on the Switch because of the fact that you're not sacrificing quality when you play an indie game on the Switch. Usually they're not nearly as technically advanced as the third-party titles, and you get the extra benefit of being able to play anywhere you want in a moment's notice, like a snap. Seconds later from playing on a TV, you can go be playing it on your toilet or in the bedroom, wherever you want to go, on the car, in a train. Doesn't matter. It's that convenience. And that's also a selling point for third parties, albeit the majority of third parties we're seeing on the Switch are ports, are old school games, but people love those games because they're able to play old favorites on the go. You can now play Dark Souls wherever you want. You can play Diablo 3 wherever you want, and those games continue to sell, and that's why we keep seeing more and more information about third parties coming over, as long as they're not really super intensive. Now, why did I go over all of this? It's because that exact group of gamers who are interested in that type of gameplay, that's pretty much exactly where Google is encroaching with Stadia. Stadia has the potential of being as instantaneous and as convenient as the Nintendo Switch. You can be playing on the TV. You could be playing a AAA game that the Switch doesn't even have, for instance. The latest Assassin's Creed Odyssey or Tomb Raider, two games that the Switch doesn't have. You can play that on your TV, and in a moment's notice, you can switch it to a tablet view and play wherever you want. Now, granted, you need to have internet connection. You're basically tethered to a radius of where you have good internet. But at the same time, this is still encroaching on that community, on that demographic that Nintendo is really nailing right now. And so it is worrisome to an extent. There are things that the Switch will always do better. The Switch is, I think, a better way to actually play the game because you don't have to worry about how you're going to control it properly, whereas you would if you were walking around with a tablet. And also the Switch doesn't have to rely on internet. So definitely it's not comparing apples to apples. It's a little bit like comparing apples to oranges in this case, although I would argue it's somewhere in the middle. But it does not mean that Nintendo is safe here. I think if I was going to predict in the short term, Nintendo's probably okay. We're not going to see a big impact on the Nintendo Switch in the next couple of years. But in the long term, I don't think Nintendo can bet as heavily on this cool novelty style hybrid, which they have right now. Maybe if you were imagining Nintendo would just continue to be this handheld hybrid manufacturer for the foreseeable future, I don't think that's as viable 5 years from now, even 10 years from now, if this is the direction the industry is going, where you're going to be able to play all of your games no matter what, when on any screen. It's not going to be that hard for internet to get better and better as time goes on. So for the opportunities for you to be able to play games anywhere it's just going to go through the roof, on top of the fact that Google is going to figure out how to make your gaming experience on the go that much easier, that much smoother. They're going to come up with a clever solution to play with a controller no matter where you are. It's going to feel like the Switch. I think in the long term, Nintendo does have something to worry about if streaming takes off in the way that Microsoft and Google really want to. In the short term, you're probably okay, but let's not write off Google Stadia that quickly. February's NPD US sales data were finally released, and although there really isn't that much to report in terms of software sales for Nintendo, no surprise there weren't really any big software releases in February for Nintendo. The company continues to dominate on the hardware front. The Switch was not only the best-selling hardware platform of February, but it also maintained the top dog status throughout the entire year so far. Granted, it's only March, so that means January and February it is the best-selling hardware compared to the other hardware platforms, but still, that's something to be happy about. This can be thanks partly due to the fact that both the PS4 and the Xbox One appear to be trending downward in terms of sales for 2019. 2019 looks to be a real dip in those sales for those consoles because of the potential successors that are being speculated to be discussed at some point this year. The PS5 and the Xbox One sequel are planned to be discussed this year. That is heavily speculated and released next year, and that's why the expectation is that those consoles are going to have the slow year. And I think the Switch is benefiting from that to an extent because the Switch is not slowing down at all. The Switch, in fact, this is when the Switch is really going to reach its maturity state, actually. It's really hitting its solid ground. It finally has a library of games that you can look back on and say, man, okay, the Switch is really stacked here, or is really becoming stacked. And after this year, it's going to have the Animal Crossing, the Pokemon, the Fire Emblem. It's going to have hit every single major franchise. So this is right in the heart of the Switch's lifespan, and that's why it's probably, for a little bit, doing better than the PS4 and the Xbox One. But it also, not to rain on the Switch's parade, it also continues to be a record breaker for Nintendo at this point in time, because if you compare this February, how well it's done in 2019, it actually has not had this level of success in the month of February since all the way back in 2011. So even though part of the reason why the Switch is doing so well comparatively is because the PS4 and Xbox One are on its way out, I'm not trying to say that the Switch isn't doing well overall. It totally is. Nintendo is benefiting from that, so that's great for the Switch. On top of some hardware sales, Nintendo themselves revealed the top 10 best-selling indie games so far on the Nintendo Switch this past week. And in no particular order, those games are Stardew Valley, Hollow Knight, Overcooked 2, Undertale, Dead Cells, Enter the Gungeon, Graceful Explosion Machine, Celeste, Golf Story, and Overcooked. I thought this was a really cool announcement to kind of look at, okay, which indie games are succeeding the most on this platform, because we always hear, and I say it all the time, that indies are doing particularly well on the Switch. We have a lot of indies turning their heads and saying, hey, let's put our game on the Switch. We're going to talk a lot more about that in the second half of the show for sure. But as I look at this list, the one thing that strikes me the most is that a lot of these titles came out in 2018. 2018 really was one of the best years for the Nintendo Switch. I believe Stardew Valley came out in 2018, Hollow Knight, Overcooked 2, Undertale, I think, came out last year, Dead Cells for sure, Enter the Gungeon, I don't remember, Celeste for sure as well. So a big chunk of this list, I would say the vast majority of this list are 2018 games, because 2018 is going to be really hard to beat in terms of indies. But I'm saying 2019 is looking really good too. And part of the reason that 2018 or 2019 rather is looking really good is that Castle Crashers Remastered is officially coming to the Nintendo Switch. I know that I guessed that maybe we would hear about it in the Nindies Showcase, but instead the behemoth, the developer of the game, decided to announce that Castle Crashers Remastered was coming to the Switch one day early on Tuesday. Now, this remastered version has upgraded texture sizes, 60 FPS, all the previously released downloadable content already packed and included. The Switch version will also have a lot of Switch-specific functionality like HD Rumble, online multiplayer, and 4-player local Joy-Con support, so you can play with 4 little Joy-Cons if that's all you have. Castle Crashers will also be coming out on the PS4 if that's something that you're more interested in. But it's nice to get this confirmation. We were talking about it earlier in the week. We were talking about it last week too. The Behemoth was teasing it on Twitter, and we got the confirmation. Castle Crashers Remastered, the remastered version of the indie hit for the Xbox 360, is making its way onto the Nintendo Switch. Nintendo held their first official Nindies Showcase of 2019 on Wednesday, and I do take a little offense to that because I know they said that in the beginning of the showcase itself, but they had a Nindies highlight video in, was it January or was it February? I think it may have been January, but they had that video. They tweeted about it. They said these are the Nindy highlights. Then they showed off games. That's where they showed off Wargroove and a few others. So I don't know why they're so keen on separating highlights from Nindies Showcase. They're getting really granular about how they specify what directs are, what Nindy showcases are, what Nindy highlights are. I mean, I digress. It's not really important, but I guess this is the first official Nindies Showcase of 2019. And although there were many indie titles that were not covered in the presentation, the games that they were shown off have proven to be like a real treat for anyone that's eagerly awaiting the next great wave of indie projects arriving on the Nintendo Switch. I mean, we just talked about the best-selling indies out right now on the Nintendo Switch, but 2019 is shaping up to be really, really nice. So games like Shovel Knight Kings of Cards, Castle Crashers Remastered, Hollow Knight Silksong, they were actually spared from this event in favor of new and shocking titles that I think got people very excited. But before we go into each individual announcement, or the majority of the announcements, I just want to talk about the overall Nindies Showcase. I thought it was very well done, although it ended a bit early. They said 30 minutes. It was more like 25 minutes, and I'm nitpicking on that part because usually Nintendo is pretty good at hitting the mark of saying, hey, we're gonna be, if we have a 30-minute direct, it's gonna be 30 minutes. I believe the Pokemon direct, they said it was 7 minutes. They get very specific about it, and then they hit it. So it shocked me that they stopped a little bit early, but the way that they structured this event, this presentation, was perfect. To start off really strong and then have a bunch of games in the middle that you don't really know about, and that's typical with indies, right? Is that the whole point is that there's so much indie content in there that by pure volume, you're just not going to know a lot of these developers, a lot of these games. You have to try to understand what those games are. You have to hear the pitch. You have to see the gameplay in order to get excited about it. And I appreciated that the way that they structured this presentation is by taking a couple minutes and saying, okay, here's gameplay for the next game, and here's the explanation about why you should care. And they gave every single game its own time to shine, and every game got a variable length of time to as part of that presentation so that it could explain itself to the audience. I thought that was perfect, even though the majority of them I thought were just okay. I mean, it's hard to tell the quality of an indie title until you actually get your hands on with it, until you dive into it a bit more. But I appreciated the way they structured the event, that they showed off these games, and at the end to also finish with a high note is that I couldn't have asked for a better Nindies Direct. So let's get into some of these announcements. So the showcase began with a real shock when they announced that the Xbox One console exclusive indie title Cuphead was crossing console boundaries by coming to the Nintendo Switch next month on April 18th. So I had to look this up because everyone was really shocked by this. I already said that about Cuphead coming to the Xbox One, and I wanted to make sure I understood why this was such a big deal. Of course, Cuphead was an indie classic the moment it released for the Xbox One, either last year or the year before that. A lot of people really loved that game. No surprise as to why. From the moment it was shown off for the first time on the Xbox E3 stage, people fell in love with it because it has this art style. I think that's the most appealing part, is that it has this art style that reminds you of like early 90s cartoon classics. It's like you're watching a Walt Disney animation from the good old days, like Steamboat Willie, but happening right in front of you, smoothly transitioning. It looks like it was painstakingly hand-drawn. but it's well worth it. On top of that, the game itself is supposed to be really fun. It's really difficult, but difficult in the fair and enjoyable way where you feel like you gained a lot of mastery from playing it long enough. So that's why people fell in love with it. But the thing about Cuphead is that it's heavily tied to Xbox. In fact, when it was shown off, it said console exclusive. It didn't say console launch exclusive. It said console exclusive. And when I went to go read more about why this is so significant, I found out a few things. One, the developer is independent. So the developer themselves are not owned by Microsoft. Two, Cuphead, the intellectual property, is owned by the developer. So neither the developer nor Cuphead itself have any ties to Microsoft, meaning that they technically could be putting out Cuphead games on different platforms without any type of boundaries. Here's the real problem. The developer signed a deal with Xbox saying that Cuphead, the game that they're making, is a console exclusive on Xbox One in perpetuity, that they could never bring that over to another home console. That was what the deal stated. So much so that when people asked them, I think last year, about whether or not there was a possibility that Cuphead could be coming to the PS4, a developer responded by saying 100% no way. Like, don't even hold out hope, which is surprising because that's not usually how it happens with independent indies like this. They usually sign a launch exclusive agreement, but then after some time has passed, they're able to bring those games over to other consoles. I mean, we just talked about Castle Crashers. That was a long way coming. Although I believe Castle Crashers was on the PS3. So again, similar to that, but Cuphead seemed to be in a different world and different deal. So for Microsoft to maybe, I guess, amend that contract to allow Cuphead to come onto the Nintendo Switch, that's very, very significant. And they must have done something special because during the actual showcase, the guys who are talking, the Nintendo representatives on the video actually stated, "Thank you to our friends at Microsoft for helping make this happen." So there is some role to be played by Microsoft saying, okay, we are okay with this coming on the Nintendo Switch, even though we could probably easily say, no way, we disallow it, it's breaking the contract. That is why it is so significant that Cuphead is coming to the Switch. Now, although the Switch is undeniably less powerful than the Xbox One, it appears that Cuphead is really not sacrificing anything in terms of quality. It's running at 60 FPS, it's 1080p when it's docked, it looks nearly identical to the original version. I was watching a Game Explain video where they had both versions side by side, could not really tell any difference. Very happy about that. In fact, they're saying that the Cuphead version for Switch is actually going to make the Xbox One version even better because they had to learn how to optimize a whole bunch of things to release it on the Nintendo Switch, and they're going to take those optimizations and bring them over to the Xbox One version. So it's kind of like a rising tide helping all boats in this situation. The game will also support 2-player multiplayer on one screen, so tabletop mode if you so choose, with 2 Joy-Cons. I love the Joy-Con support we're seeing from these indie games, and have a physical release. So it's a very special indie game. We do not see a lot of indie titles getting physical releases for the Nintendo Switch, and when they do, they're usually like novelty ones with limited run gaming. No, this one's going to have a physical release on launch, I would imagine, April 18th. And here's the kicker, it's going to have Xbox Live support. So we've been talking about Xbox Live for Nintendo Switch. They have not detailed exactly what that means, and it will not have Xbox Live support on April 18th when it launches. That's no surprise there, because earlier in the week, we heard more about Xbox's plans to bring Xbox Live to iOS and Android, and they said that they were not ready to discuss Nintendo Switch. So it'd be weird if a month later, they were ready to release a game with Xbox Live on the Nintendo Switch. Makes sense. At some point and later on, we're going to see Xbox Live support on Cuphead. I would imagine that means we get achievements. That means we get a whole bunch of other things in some future. We don't know what that is exactly. Now, here's the final thing I want to say about the news about Cuphead is that when asked about how Cuphead ended up bridging that platform gap between Xbox and Nintendo Switch, the developers had this to say. Well, from my perspective, and I don't know, so now I'm just speculating, but the industry is changing a little bit more to be more supportive of indies. Why should we have so many walls up? Why not support all gamers and work between the Goliaths like Microsoft and Nintendo to find a balance so that indie gaming can have a better chance? Instead of locking things out for the rest of time, that's kind of a problematic approach that I don't think would make it in the future. So I like this statement. I wanted to bring up this statement up because it's hinting towards maybe a different future, a brighter future for indies. The less console exclusivity that indies have to fight through, the better that indie gaming is going to be overall. because indies rarely get to experience, at least when they launch, that support of or the benefit of launching across all platforms like third parties. We just saw Wargroove as a good example of that, a big indie title coming to the Nintendo Switch. It's not on the PS4. It's not on the wait, actually it might be on the Xbox One. Anyway, there are forget what I said if I said that wrong. There are indie games obviously that exclusively launched for consoles. Journey, as a good example, is always associated with PlayStation 4. This game, Cuphead, is heavily associated with the Xbox. There are indie games that have been heavily associated with Nintendo. But when they're able to cross those boundaries, the indie developers benefit tremendously. They can actually grow, they can get those better sales and actually help them produce the next indie game, which could again come to more consoles. When you hamstring them a bit and say, no, you're locked into this specific deal, you're risking that they don't sell enough copies because they're locked into one console, and maybe the indie developer fails because of that. I'm sure that happens all the time. We just don't hear about it because there are thousands and thousands of indie developers who make games and they don't get any fanfare, but could get fanfare depending on what console they end up releasing. Maybe it would have been great on the Nintendo Switch, but they couldn't get the deal to work out with Nintendo, so then they had to sign Xbox and whatever. There are all of these caveats. So I like this idea that we're moving potentially to a future that's more friendly to indies. Cuphead specifically, all for it. I'm so stoked to play Cuphead. I'm such a big Disney nerd that I want to just kind of fall in love with this art style and just watch it in motion in front of my face, holding that Switch up to right close. Although I know that the difficulty might get me, but as long as it's fair, I'm willing to play. I didn't have a problem with games like Dark Souls or anything like that because I understand fair difficulty. If it starts being cheesy, then I'll probably put it down for something else. But I'm excited for a Cuphead that's coming out next month, and I'm also excited for what this means between this relationship with Microsoft and Nintendo. We've talked plenty of times about the rumors between Microsoft and Nintendo and how their partnership is happening. One of the rumors was that Cuphead is coming. And another rumor in that same breath was that Ori and the Blind Forest was coming. So does this add more credibility to those rumors? Only time will tell, but it's looking very positive. Although Cuphead was definitely one of the stars of the show, Nintendo revealed a wealth of other titles coming to their platform, including Red Lantern, a game where you play as a sled dog musher who gets lost in the wilderness, Stranger Things 3, the game, which asks you to play alongside or in local co-op against the evils of the Upside Down. The story adheres closely to the Season 3 narrative and launches on the same day of the actual TV show, on July 4th. And Blaster Master 2, the sequel to the original Blaster Master 0, which was also available, and it's actually out right now for the Nintendo Switch. Zero 2, it launched alongside... Oh man, I'm running over myself here. I'm just trying to say that Blaster Master 0 was one of the first games you actually could play on the Nintendo Switch. I think it released within the launch month of the Nintendo Switch, and it's a reimagining of Blaster Master, which came out for the NES. So this is like a sequel of the reimagining, and it's available right now. Blaster Master 02. There were also many other titles showcased in the showcase, but if you want a full rundown, I encourage you to either check out the showcase yourself on Nintendo's YouTube channel or go to a site like Nintendo Everything or Nintendo Life. I love those sites, and they usually make really great and concise articles about what was announced during the events, just like these. Red Lantern, the one that I mentioned first, is actually the one that really stood out to me because I love games like Tacoma and Firewatch, and this was just right up my alley. They started talking about like being a sled dog musher, and I was like, okay. I mean, I love dogs. I love where this is going, but at the same time, like, I'm not really interested in some racing sled dog simulator. And then once they showed the video of the girl going and racing with the dogs and all of a sudden getting attacked by a bear in the trailer and knocking the sled over, and then it looked like the bear killed a dog, man. It hit me hard, and I'm like, oh, this is like a survival story type experience. It hooked me. It got me. It was one of the few games that happened in the middle of the showcase. I was like, oh, I gotta pay attention to this game. So if you want to know more, you go read about it. I'm not going to cover every single announcement, but I will cover my personal favorite. Cadence of Hyrule, Crypt of the NecroDancer, featuring The Legend of Zelda. Yep, that's the entire official title. It's a sequel to the beloved indie classic Crypt of the NecroDancer, which asks you to tackle like roguelike style dungeons while moving to a rhythmic beat. I have a confession to make with this one. Even though Crypt of the NecroDancer is a very popular indie game, a lot of people really love it. A lot of people who are into the roguelike genre said that this is a fun twist on it because it is a roguelike, except as you play, there's a beat going on and you have to move your player to the beat. Although the thing that makes people interested in the game in the first place, this rhythmic movement system, was actually what turned me off by it. I know that's ironic. There's something in the back of my head that makes me say, hey, that's a stupid reason. You should still give it a chance. But I just never got around to it because I was like, well, what? I don't want to be limited to the soundtrack. I just want to move around and do my own thing. But that was until the showcase. Cadence of Hyrule will take the Crypt of the NecroDancer series to a whole new kingdom by introducing the Legend of Zelda intellectual property. Oh yeah, I'm in. I am in. Does that mean I am a Zelda shrill? Possibly. Does that mean I'm only looking at this game because Nintendo has given it their blessing? Probably. But it might introduce me to this new franchise, and it will introduce me to this new franchise in a way where I can appreciate it for its foundation. And maybe I'm proven wrong that this rhythmic movement system is actually a really good thing. The game will let you play as Link or Zelda, but in the same gameplay as the original Crypt of the NecroDancer. There will be classic Zelda enemies like a Lionel, classic Zelda items like the Hero's Bow, as well as 25 remixed Legend of Zelda tunes, all in gorgeous pixel art, which reminds me so much of a modern day Minish Cap. The game is scheduled to come out this spring. When I watched the trailer, I was like, okay, this game looks really good. I don't know what it's all about. Oh, okay, Crypt of the NecroDancer. Yeah, I never played that game for silly reasons, really, but I never played that game. And all of a sudden, the beat kicks in. I was like, man, this sounds so much like Zelda. And then they start playing Zelda, and I'm like, are they allowed to do that? I mean, there must be some legal reason that they can't do that. And then all of a sudden you see Link and you see Zelda moving around. I'm like, yes, this is so great. This actually reminds me that we talked about this a week ago, 2 weeks ago, about how there was some rumor that there was going to be another Zelda game, that it was going to be a top-down Zelda game, a smaller title for the eShop coming out this year. And I was like, oh man, I can't believe that. That doesn't make any sense. Why would Nintendo make that many Zelda games by themselves? But now it does make sense. It totally makes sense because they're not making the Zelda game. They are licensing the intellectual property to an indie developer to make a licensed game. And now all of a sudden it makes so much more sense. So that rumor was completely on point, and Cadence of Hyrule is that game. If you can't tell, very excited. Top of my list in terms of the games that I want to play from the showcase. It goes Cadence of Hyrule, Cuphead, and then that other game, Red Lantern, where you are the dog musher who gets attacked by the bear. Okay, those are my top 3 games. I am actually really excited for what this means with Nintendo in general. I love how this generation, they've been way more willing to share their intellectual properties. We got Mario and Rabbids Kingdom Battle during that launch year with Ubisoft, and that propelled that game probably to sales that it never would have gotten if it didn't have the Mario IP on it. And now you have this game, which is definitely going to get eyeballs on Crypt of the NecroDancer, that franchise, who never would have looked at it before, me included. And I love that Nintendo is willing to spread their properties to not only third parties, but to intellectual or to indies in ways that they really haven't done in the past, not to this extent, because it's going to help their entire platform as a whole. Nintendo has always been successful with their first parties. Their first parties always sell well. Even if you go back to the Wii U, where it seemed like nothing was selling well, at the very least, their first parties were selling well. And to share the secret sauce, right? The recipe of their success, which is the trust, the branding, the intellectual properties that they have with other developers, with other sectors of their groups, of the platform as a whole, with the indies and third parties, it's going to make people who own Switches, who don't necessarily care about those things, suddenly notice. I mean, think about how many people own Nintendo Switches and have never bought downloaded games. I think the ratio that we discussed a week or two ago was at 50%. Around 50% still buy physical games primarily. And that means there's a lot of people out there who don't even use the eShop that much, and who don't know a lot about the indie community out there, the thriving indies that are on the Nintendo Switch. There's still a lot of people who don't know anything about it. And a game like Cadence of Hyrule is going to get people to think, say, wait a second, a new Zelda game has come out? I'm going to go find out what that means. I'm going to go download a game for the first time on the eShop. It's going to help out the indie community in ways that without this intellectual property sharing, we might not have gotten. So that's really cool to see. Excited about this game. Excited to see if Nintendo is willing to do this more with other developers as a whole, because as long as they're willing to pick developers that are going to treat those properties fairly and nicely, kind of like Mario and Rabbids, and hopefully Crypt of the NecroDancer, Cadence of Hyrule, then I am all for it. And that's everything I had for the show. Thank you guys for bearing with me. It was a long episode, but there's also a ton of things that happened this week. We're reaching the end of March and April. April is going to be a really cool month for Nintendo, I totally believe, because they're going to talk about Smash Brothers, that new spring update. It's also the end of their financial quarters is the end of March, and April is when we find out a lot more about it. And that's significant because it's not only the end of the quarter, it's the end of the financial year. This is when they start a new year, and big announcements usually happen at that time, as well as reflections on the whole last year and how well they did in general. So we're going to get some juicy information coming out in the future from Nintendo, no doubt. But besides that, if you want to talk to me about other things or Nintendo things, you can reach out to me at heartcontainerspodcast.com or my personal Twitter, which is at RomeFawaz. That's ROMEFAWAZ. This has been Heart Containers for Friday, March 22nd. I hope you guys have a great weekend, and make sure to tune in back here on Monday so we can talk about more Nintendo news.